All right, I am here live to discuss Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why. Now, if you haven't tuned into these before, I do a book discussion every single Friday at noon Pacific Standard Time. We pick something from the leadership lexicon, and I kind of go through. And these are a little bit different. It isn't necessarily a book summary, shall we say. It is more of a discussion pulling out some of the highlights, some of the things that jumped out to me. And oftentimes I'll put a little spin to make sure it's applicable for frontline leaders. So yes, there's some summary aspects, but a lot of it is highlights as well. So thrilled to have you on board today. I will do right away a quick shout out for next week's book. It's Atomic Habits. Check it out. We'll be discussing it next Friday. It's hitting the bestseller lists right now, leadership and management. So again, Start With Why, Simon Sinek. It's been around forever, and with a lot of these books where you have read them before, what I find is that if you take them, and if you've read them, did this with the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, almost everybody has read that book. However, when was the last time that you read it? For me, it might have been 5 years ago that I had read that book. A whole lot has changed in 5 years, and I'm able to bring new perspective to it. Same with this. You may have read this book when it came out years ago, but you bring a fresh perspective when you read it again. So the great books stand up over time, and you learn a little bit more and learn a little bit something different every time you come back to them. So with that said, Start With Why. Something very near and dear to my heart. If you've tuned into any of my live sessions, you'll hear the why coming up almost every single time. And it's a little bit more precise than the why that Simon Sinek is talking about. We'll get into some of that here. But it's vitally important, and this is definitely a book that every person should read. It was interesting coming back to this. I very much enjoyed the book when I read it many years ago. But this time it was actually almost irritating me the first 50 pages because he was pushing the agenda so much and making some logical leaps. And so it was frustrating, but it did settle down. And what that is kind of a device that he's using to kind of get you set up for everything else. But very much enjoyed the book. Lots of good takeaways from it. And so we'll just dive kind of right into it. And it's one of the first things that I had noted here is that most companies have no clue why their customers are their customers. And so this is setting the stage for the why for your organization. And when we talk about the why in this case, a lot of what Simon's talking about in this is the why and the purpose behind an organization, why they do what they do. But the quick translation for you is, why is it that you do what you do in leadership, and why is it that your department does what they do? If you don't have oversight over an entire organization, that's fine. Do a quick little translation for that. And I'd never heard it discussed this way. Most companies have no clue why their customers are their customers. And it's a great little mind opener to just kind of start thinking about something deeper. Why is it that people choose your product or choose to do business with your company as opposed to all of your competitors? And pretty much any organization has a competitor out there. If you're in the nonprofit realm, why is it that your organization, why do people donate to your organization as opposed to another organization? Maybe a little bit clearer in nonprofits, but not always. So asking that question and kind of thinking about that is a great little step, kind of a little appetizer to diving in a little bit deeper. So very few companies can clearly articulate why they do what they do. When I say why, I don't mean to make money. That's a result, and that's something to be very clear on. Why is it that you do what you do as an organization? If you're a company, then the why is always to make a profit. No. That is a result of what you do. You want to go a level deeper, and it becomes a little bit easier when you think of a founder's mindset. Why is it that the founder chose your industry to start in? Why did the founder choose your products to start creating as opposed to the myriad of other products that are out there? Why is it that that was what was important? What was the aim for that? And so just getting through kind of talking about the big 800-pound gorilla in the room that nobody's talking about. The reason you do something, the why behind what you do, is not money related. There's lots of ways to make money. The question is why did you choose what it is that you chose to make money? Russell, Ahmed, Tracy, good to see you here. Glad you're able to join. So continuing on in the discussion here, and he uses Apple a lot. Uses that, and it's good that he uses Apple because it's something that everybody is very familiar with. Their story, their products, their marketing, everything else. So it's a good little thing to kind of weave the thread through this. So he'll reference Apple a lot in this book. It's not what Apple does that distinguishes them. It is why they do it. Their products give life to their cause. All right, so it isn't the products themselves that distinguish Apple. Sure, there's a product differentiation between Apple and, say, IBM or Dell or HP. There is a difference there. However, what really distinguishes them is the culture and the why behind what they do. They're looking to spur authority. They're looking, you go back to, he references that famous 1984 ad that they did. They're looking to thumb their nose in the face of big industry, in the face of bureaucracies, that sort of thing. That's their culture. That's what distinguishes their product so much. Juanita, good to see you join us here. Spinning through. When a company clearly communicates their why, what they believe, and we believe what they believe, then we will sometimes go to extraordinary lengths to include those products or brands in our life. And so we're still talking about distinguishing your department, your organization from your competitors, from everybody else. And one of the main mechanisms for that is to create a sense of belonging. Use the example of your hometown sports team. You have a sense of belonging. You're willing to buy merchandise because it speaks to that sense of belonging in who you are. So when we talk about Apple products and we talk about their a little bit more rebel mindset, their creative mindset, their individual mindset as opposed to the collective, when you have an Apple product, that's what you are portraying. It's like advertising yourself and what you are about based on what you have. I think that the term that's used is relevance. What you own and what you wear and everything should have some sense of relevance for who you are as a person. Rightly or wrongly, that's it's something that's come out recently. So that's what they're really getting at. That's what's kind of distinguishing them a little bit more, but it's also a marketing mechanism. When you get clear on what your why is, then people will associate with you. People that are similar to you and share those whys will associate with you. It's the reason why great leaders or honest leaders rarely are hanging out with poor and crummy leaders because they don't have anything to kind of tie themselves together. They don't have anything in common. People seek that commonality. They seek belonging. It's something that's wired into our neuroscience. And so talking about your why as an organization, as a department, etc., will help attract people similar to you and set up the stage for that sense of belonging. Next comment that I'll have here and spin through. And it's interesting, this book, usually I will dog ear a ton in these books. And the message that Simon Sinek is portraying here is somewhat obvious. To those that are in leadership circles, it's somewhat obvious the power of it. And for those that have that nagging sort of resistance to it, he breaks it down through a ton of stories and examples out there in the real world from real companies and real situations that are out there. And so this book is very dense with storytelling. And I don't want to say he's beating the message into you a little bit to break through any resistance that you have, but that's could be kind of considered part of the result of it. So there is a lot of stories. And so the meat of it, and we continue to get to some of that, the meat of the concept here, but it's built up on a lot of stories, which makes the book very easy to read. There's some dense topics in here, but the illustrations that he draws through storytelling make it much easier to get through. There you go. if he's talking through cultural aspects, all right, and nouns are not actionable. So we put keywords that represent the values of an organization: honesty, integrity, innovation, that sort of thing. But nouns are not actionable. You want to change that culture, that why, into verbs. And I actually do this a lot through my workshops when we're talking about corporate culture. We'll talk about a culture if it's established already, and if it isn't, then we'll walk through kind of creating the framework for it. But then we talk about putting it into action. How does it relate to day-to-day tasks? How does it relate to challenges? How does it help you? We turn that culture that's on a piece of paper, and we turn it into actions in a regular day-to-day atmosphere. And I just really liked this particular takeaway, and we see it in so many organizations, so many businesses. Their core values are up on the wall, and that's great. But if you have to write, and I love it, if you have to write honesty on your wall to remind you to do it, then you probably have bigger problems anyways. For values or guiding principles to be truly effective, they have to be verbs. You have to take those into action. How does honesty apply? Does that mean giving the customer the hard truth when you don't want to tell them about it? What does that actually represent? Try to spin this down here. So I just really like that particular takeaway. If you have to put honesty on the wall, you probably have a bigger issue than you want to talk about. It's a false assumption that differentiation happens in the how and the what you do, and this is very common. All right, differentiation happens in the why and how you do it. So when you look at companies, you tend to look at them as differentiated based on the results. So that might be the product that they create. That might be the service that they give. Whatever that happens to be, the what of what they do. All right, that's what we look at because that's kind of the face of things. But the differentiation really happens down below. And the example that he draws many times is computers. What is the difference between a Dell and an Apple Macintosh? Well, the difference from computing power, graphics, etc., isn't too different. What is different is the culture behind that, the why behind why the organization is doing what they are doing. Dell was very interested in efficiency and making computing and computing power affordable so that it went out to the mass market. Apple was looking to do things differently, as they say. And so it resonates with a different individual. And this shows up later on when Dell tries to break into MP3 players, that sort of thing. It didn't make sense. Whereas Apple was flouting the music industry, was in the face of telecommunications, that sort of thing, when they created the iPod and the iPhone and the iTunes store, all of those things. So it fit with their why. Whereas people couldn't understand why, if you remember this, Gateway PCs came out with flat screen televisions. They were a computer company. People didn't understand why they did what they did, and it didn't resonate. It's back to a marketing thing. And for those that didn't know, Simon Sinek actually came from a marketing background. He was with marketing firms, and that's actually how he initially discovered his the start with why principles, because he was looking at why certain ad campaigns work and why other ones don't. And he got to this deeper meaning, which he talks about. Next comment I have in here, and I've underlined a whole bunch on these 2 pages. Whoa, that's right. We're starting to talk about trust. All right, the why builds trust, and I'll talk about that. When you give directions to your team, when you give them tasks to do, explaining why what they're doing is important, why it needs to be done a certain way. That builds trust because people gain understanding that you are making decisions not from an emotional standpoint or knee-jerk reaction. You're making decisions thoughtfully. That helps build trust. But there's a whole chapter on it here. Trust begins to emerge when we have a sense that another person or organization is driven by things other than their own self-gain. That is one of the main keys to trust. All right. I can't trust an individual that is selfish and out for themselves. We all have those individuals that we work with. I can, however, trust somebody that is passionate for the mission of the organization, that is clear on why they are doing things. That's a clear differentiation there. And it's why it's important that you set those Whether it's a mission statement, whether it is core values, what is the purpose behind your organization, your department, your work, and why does it matter? And you talk about those things so that people see that there is another motivation behind just self-gain for yourself, getting yourself promoted, getting more money, whatever it is. You're looking to accomplish something outside of yourself, and it makes it easy for people to trust you more. You have to talk about your why and prove it with what you do. All right. So there's a framework here, and he calls it the golden circle. At the center of that circle is your why. That is the core. The second thing is how you do what you do. So how the why manifests itself. And then the last area is what you produce. Now, what happens a lot of times is people look from the outside in, not the inside out. So you're looking at what are the differences between the cars that you are looking to buy, performance, price, etc., etc. And then you might look at a little bit deeper into how it's made. Look at this in food. How is it organic? Or organic food, what goes into it, that sort of thing. And then you can look even a level deeper, and the last thing to consider is the why. So why is it that they do what they do? What's their passion on things? And we see this a lot with our own lives. We look at what we want to do, not how we're going to do it, not whether it attaches to our core principles. And Stephen Covey touches on this as well. Anything that doesn't match our core principles is where we find resistance in our own lives. And so I just kind of wanted to double back to that. He calls it the golden circle. Why at the center, then how, then what. All right. Leading, however, means that others, I love good stuff as far as leadership is concerned. Sharon, good to see you here. Leading, however, means that others willingly follow you, not because they have to, not because they are paid to, but because they want to. Getting in touch with your why makes that much easier. It actually makes the leadership aspect of things easier in your day-to-day job, not just the managing aspect of things. When people understand you, what drives you, what your purpose is, and likewise the purpose and whys behind the organization that you're a part of, it makes them easier to be led in what they are doing without any of these external motivations. And that's a whole other discussion. He doesn't call them motivations. He calls them manipulations, which is a nice way of phrasing it. But you don't have to rely on those motivating factors because you're getting deep into the motivation aspect of things. And I know motivation is something that comes up all the time on my live Q&As, and getting to that deeper level with the other person, what really motivates them and drives them deep in their core, what drives them, and then what drives the organization are two big keys to that. Went through a big story in regards to Continental Airlines turned around from the worst airline to the best airline back, I think, in the late 80s, and talking through he was talking through with the CEO, Gordon Bethune, who orchestrated that turnaround. And there was a big focus on the employee and driving employee ownership, that sort of thing. And there was just a really nice takeaway from here as far as being honest with your employees and the power of transparency. And it gets to one of my key concepts, and that is employees have the answers to so much of the problems that you might face. If you have issues in the organization, struggles in the organization, employees often have the idea that can get you out of that. You just have to engage them. The comment is that you don't lie to your own doctor, he says, and you can't lie to your own employees. I'm going to say that again because it's important. You don't lie to your own doctor, he says, and you can't lie to your own employees. You don't lie to your doctor because they have the remedy for what ails you. You can't lie to your employees because they have the answer to your problems. Not just ideas, but simple engagement, ownership, which all leads to motivation, which means peak productivity for them. So if you find yourself being wishy-washy with the truth with your employees and kind of managing the truth, then you might look to take a step back from that because you might be actually hurting yourself down the road as far as their engagement and their trust is concerned. The role of a leader, talking a little bit more generally here again, the role of a leader is not to come up with all the great ideas. The role of a leader is to create an environment in which great ideas can happen. It is the people inside the company, those on the front lines, who are best qualified to find new ways of doing things. And I'll try to carry on here. The people who answer the phones and talk to customers, for example, can tell you more about the kinds of questions they get than can anyone sitting in an executive suite miles away. All right? The struggles, the bottlenecks, the problems, the errors, all of those things are felt by your team. Your team, your employees, want things to be easy, and easy means running effectively. And so where things aren't running effectively, they feel it, they know it, they are frustrated by it. And so if you can engage them, A, it builds trust, but B, you also solve some of those problems and are able to more easily accomplish the goals that you've set for the organization. The ability, and this gets into it, the ability in talking through ideas and innovation. The ability of a company to innovate is not just useful for developing new ideas. So innovation is always talked about the next thing, whatever. It is also invaluable for navigating struggles. If you have problems, if you need to change things, you may find that innovating your way out of that struggle is something that is just as beneficial to the bottom line as innovating and creating a new product or something like that. You can innovate internally to improve processes, and it's an important area that's often overlooked when we start talking about new ideas and innovation. We're often focused outward towards the consumer, and you can focus that inward and accomplish really great things. Just a nice little takeaway there. Still talking about trust, and I love the fact that there was a huge chapter on trust in this book, because it really is such a key, and something that's often overlooked in leadership today is the importance of having that trust with your employees. One of the reasons that you need to have trust, if there were no trust, then no one would take any risks. If you find that your operational tempo, how quick things are being processed or working through your operation, is slowing down, one of the first areas to look at is trust. How are people trusting each other? Because when they don't take risks, when they don't take even just a logical leap, sometimes is a risk. When they don't take those logical leaps, it slows things down while they wait for approval, while they do a double check on things. And I don't mean working carelessly, quickly, that sort of thing. That's not what we're talking about here. But there's risks that are taken, small risks. And when trust isn't there, they aren't taken, and everything slows down. And then briefly, reciprocal behavior. So we talked about reciprocal behavior in relation to creating a why, creating a purpose, creating a belief behind your organization and your department that can resonate with how people see themselves and how they want to behave or are behaving. And that creates a bond that can differentiate your product and your leadership. But there's also reciprocal behavior in when we talk trust. You need to trust people first, oftentimes, before they will trust you. If you empower people and take that risk, they will be more likely to take risks and empower others and give others the benefit of the doubt. That reciprocal behavior, you get what you give. So if you want your team to be more empowered, then you have to give them that empowerment. Oftentimes, it's ourselves that are the bottleneck in so many of those things. Still talking about trust in here. She's a great leader talking about in the military, a particular Air Force now general who distinguished herself greatly. Lots of good stories in regards to that. She's a great leader because she understands that earning the trust of an organization doesn't come from setting out to impress everyone. That's a common misconception, common mistake. They will trust me when they are impressed with my work. That's part of it. It comes from setting out to serve those who serve her. Right? Yes, you need to be exceptional at your job, right? But impressing people isn't what gives you trust. Serving them and getting them results, that's what builds trust, because that's an outward thing, not a selfish thing. Again, you focus outward to get trust. You don't focus inward. You're serving others, not serving yourself. But I actually underline that simply because oftentimes what we look to build trust with our boss is we look to impress them with our resume, where we went to school, where we've worked before, the big projects that we've worked on, or we look for those big projects to set out for and do and achieve things. And it isn't that achievement, it's the serving of the boss and their priorities that is going to build trust. For a message to have real impact, to affect behavior and seed loyalty, it needs more than just publicity. It needs to publicize some of the higher purpose, cause, or belief to which those with similar values and beliefs can relate. So, Mary, good to see you here. This gets into one of those core principles that I talk about, the day-to-day leadership. All right, when you hand out tasks, when you hand out duties, when you hand out projects, no matter how simple, it's often very important to give the reason behind why you are giving that out. All right, and it doesn't need to be convoluted, it doesn't need to be complicated. It can simply be a sentence fragment, because blank. I need you to take out the trash because the vice president is coming by in 15 minutes and we want to make sure that it's nice. If you didn't add that because, they'd be like, well, why am I being punished for taking out the trash? That's not my job. Giving the reason behind that helps people to understand everything, and it allows them to buy into that just a little bit more. You're affecting that behavior with the reasoning. That's the practical, I want to say, where the rubber hits the road, to use the acronym in regards to cars. That's what matters. If you want to influence behavior, create a cause or a belief behind that. And so talking about why things are important is something that creates quicker buy-in and creates more camaraderie and teamwork as well. And you're able to actually reinforce. It's a reciprocal relationship. You're able to get more buy-in on the task that you're looking for somebody to complete, but then you're also able to reinforce the belief system as well by creating some life behind it and showing its applicability to the work that's being done. So there's a reciprocal behavior there. Kim, it's good to be on Friday. Happy Friday to you too. Moving on, I did just want to briefly, try to throw it up here for the calendar or camera. So we talked about the why, the how, and the what. So the why is at the center of things, but it's also kind of three-dimensional is what he talks about, all right? So you have a why at the top of the cone there. You have the how things are done, and then the what. But the marketplace, your team, often only sees the what. They are, to bring this up here again, they're down here, and they only have exposure to the what. So it is the result of what you do, of why you're there, how you're going to manifest your reason for being, and it shows up in the what. The what is the result of the why, and that's what people see most often out there. I just wanted to highlight that illustration. With a why clearly stated in an organization, anyone within the organization can make a decision as clearly and as accurately as the founder. So talking through communication here. And this is one of those things that speeds things up. When you talk about priorities, when you talk about core values, when you talk about mission statements, it's easier for people to put the pieces of the puzzle together. This shows up, I use the why a lot in regards to delegation. So when you are delegating a task to somebody, you might go through the step-by-step on things. But there's almost always something that they either miss or that comes up that they have a question about. And so to ensure that they don't come back to you any more than necessary, I talk about the importance of delegating a task, but giving the reason why it's important and why it has an impact on the operation, other departments, that sort of thing. When people are clear on the reasoning and the why behind something, it's easier for them to tie things together and make those logical leaps in what you're looking for. When we talk about organizations and why they are in business, when we talk about proper mission statements, core values, that sort of thing, those guide decisions. A workplace culture guides the decisions of people in the organization. They make hundreds of decisions every day. Some of them aren't even comprised in the standard operating procedures, and they can't always be there to, or you can't always be there to guide them. So they make those leaps with the culture, and that's what aligns everything. That's the power of having a good, proper why. And why it matters to you, and how that makes things much easier for you as a leader. When your team is empowered with that, they don't have to come back to you with so many questions. When you have a team that is coming to you to ask questions about everything, get in touch with the why, get in touch with your core principles, your mission, what it is that you're looking to do. And that if you communicate that a little bit more, hopefully they will come back to you a little bit less. Most organizations today use very clear metrics to track the progress and growth of what they do, or the results of what they do. Usually it's money. Unfortunately, we have very poor measurements to ensure that the why stays clear. So, you're able to manage what you can measure. That's old Peter Drucker quote, from way back when. What gets measured gets managed. All right, so we measure a lot of the what. Orders shipped, invoices processed, widgets made, whatever it happens to be. We measure a lot of what, but we don't measure often the why. So why is it that you are in business? What is your impact on the greater world? Why do you do what you do? And can you find some measure of addressing that? Usually it takes a little bit of creativity, but it is also usually there. So also measure the why. So as a leader, you might be fired up to have an impact on the organization. I'll tell you what, throughout my career, what I really wanted was impact. And so what might be, and I haven't even thought through this, so you bear with me there, but what are measures that I could come up with that direct that impact? Well, I could talk about, how would that impact take place? How many people did I hire? How many people did I get promoted? Maybe that would be what it would be. How I affected the financial aspects of the organization. It might be how I developed people. How many times was I training an individual, or acknowledging successes, advice, whatever that happens to be. You have to get creative. And again, I hadn't thought that through, so you watch my brain work there just a little bit. But look for measures on the why. What gets measured gets managed. Very, very true. So don't just manage the what, you can manage the why as well in this. A couple of last comments, and I mentioned how the concept behind the book and the importance of having a reason and a why driving all of your decisions. I don't want to say is obvious, that's belittling it, and I don't want to put it out there, but it is a simple concept, and he uses a ton of stories to drive that point home, round out the discussion, address any obvious concerns that you might have in regards to it, and it makes the book very enjoyable to read. But it also makes the principles kind of simple to kind of get through. So you'll see this is a much shorter session with a very famous book. So a couple of just leadership comments that he makes in the afterword. All leaders must have two things. They must have a vision of the world that does not exist, and they must have the ability to communicate that vision. So in leadership, we're setting the course. Where are we going? Get that clear vision and communicate that vision to your team. And that's what marshals the resources into creating the how to get there. That vision is your why. Next step is the how, and then the what follows that as far as the application into the real world there. And last but not least, leaders inspire action. And that's one of the last things he leads off with there. And that is that why needs to translate into action. Having grandiose goals, that sort of thing, is useless if you don't work through the how and the what of things as well. So leaders not only inspire a vision and set that vision and communicate that vision, they make it compelling enough to where people will want to take action. And that's really where you get the results of so much. Isn't the planning, isn't the thinking, it's moving things into action. And I'd love to see people looking to focus on that in meetings in particular. Nicole, glad you were able to join. If you missed a bunch of it, you can always rewind it and see it. So any questions in regards to Simon Sinek and his Start With Why? Happy to field those. if you have any. You can always reach out to me, cm@cameronmorsey.com. If you want to email me and keep yourself anonymous there, Crystal, glad you joined us as well. So you can check out, if you came to this late, you can always check out the replay. I've got that up, and I've got all of my book discussions up. You can go to over to my YouTube channel, maybe a little bit easier to dive through them there. I've got them all organized in the book discussion section. Look me up, Cameron Morsey, at Cameron Morsey basically, over on YouTube. And next week, we are talking through Atomic Habits by James Clear. New book that's hit the bestseller list and being talked about, so I figured I'd just go ahead and review it right away and go through some of those things. But as always, if you need anything, let me know. Email me, direct message me, hit up some of those comments. Otherwise, have a great weekend, and I will see you all on the other side of it. Thanks so much for joining today.